Which of these elements do you think is the most important one and the one that's going to have the biggest impact on your ability to become fluent in a language? Now, this is a question I asked the members in my WhatsApp group, and the results were quite interesting because the immense majority of the members actually chose number 4, consistency and discipline, as the element that they consider had the largest impact on the results. But this is not quite what research shows us. And today I want to unpack which one is the most important and the one that is going to be underlying the effectiveness of all the other ones. And if you're wondering, like, who are you and why should I listen to you? My name is Esther. I'm a doctor in language education. I've spent the past 25 years of my life learning, teaching, and researching languages. I've learned 9 languages. I don't master all of them, though. I do master some of them. I even became a translator and interpreter. I trained for 4 years, and I was working as such for a number of years. Then I trained as a language teacher, and I was also teaching for 10 plus years. And then as part of my PhD, I specialized in the science of language learning, more specifically on anything related to the brain. So both the neuroscience and the psychology of language learning. And now, after working for the United Nations, the European Union, the University of Cambridge, I've decided that I want to share the insights that I learned throughout all of my years of research, teaching and learning with all of you so that you too can start using more efficient language learning strategies and therefore see faster progress. And if you want to stay in touch, you can join my free WhatsApp channel, or otherwise you may want to check my language learning lab, where I can provide much more personalized support to whatever challenges you are experiencing. Now, let's go back to the poll because I think the results are super interesting. Now, as you can see, we've got 5 options. I gave them 5 very clear options. The first option is the importance of finding the right method for you. And you will all agree with me that this one is a really, really important point. The second point is the importance of understanding how your brain learns languages. And as you can see, this has been actually quite a popular answer, but not the most popular one. So that's quite interesting. Now, the third one is working with the right teacher. And surprisingly, there are not too many students who think having the right teacher is important for the learning. This, as a former teacher, totally hurt my feelings when I saw this, but I'm going to explain in a minute why I think that's happening, and it's probably partly our fault. Then number 4 is the most popular answer. It's consistency and discipline. This is the one that most students see as central for the learning. They really think that if they manage to be consistent and disciplined with their approach, they will eventually get good results. Now, this isn't completely untrue, this isn't completely wrong, but I'm going to explain why there is another option that is actually much more important, and that without that option, it doesn't matter how consistent or how disciplined you are, you may never get to the results that you want. And then the last option, it's clear goals and roadmap. And I did include this one on purpose. I think it's super important. If you've been working with me, you might know that I am a big fan of having very clear goals and having a very clear roadmap. So I did know there would be a number of students, a number of people that, because they've seen so many of my videos and they've been in so many of my private trainings, they know I love this, so they probably think that was the right answer. So now let's go straight into the answer, because what we know from research is that yes, all of these elements are super important, but there is one that is key, and that it's really underlying all of the other points, and that if you don't get this one right, the chances of you getting very good results, even if you are really good at the 4 other points, are still going to be slower progress, and the results are going to be kind of less impressive than if you get this one thing right. And I don't know if you've got a guess, but the answer that research seems to suggest to be the most important one, it's option number 2, understanding how your brain learns. And why is this one the most important one? Because again, you'll say, Esther, all of those elements are important. I don't see how this one is more important than the others. Now, let's look at this one, let's look at what we mean, and then let's look at how it underlies all the other elements and why understanding how your brain learns is actually the basis of you managing to get the rest of the elements right. Now, when we mean that you need to understand how your brain learns, what we mean is that you need to understand your own personal preferences, the way in which your brain is going to perceive new information, it's going to process that new information, it's going to remember that information, it's going to store that information, and then the ways in which it's going to retrieve that information. And we've got quite a lot of research in this, actually, both from the psychology field and from neuroscience. So psychologists have developed what they call the cognitive profiles, which is kind of something similar to the learning styles, but it's much more complex. It's much more complete. Learning styles, it's a bit of a myth, because everybody thinks that you can be like either visual or auditory or kinesthetic, and that those are the learning styles. But when we look at the research behind it, these styles have not actually been validated. We don't know if there's like 3 or 5 or 2. They can't even agree on how many. Different studies show different things. And so researchers started digging a bit deeper, and what they realized is that these styles are a bit like the surface of something much more important that it's underlying it. And it's what they call the cognitive profiles. It's really how your brain functions, and again, in a way that psychologists would measure it. So we're looking at, again, perception, we're looking at your attention, what are you paying attention to, how are you remembering things, what strategies your brain is consciously or unconsciously using to choose the words that it's going to produce, in which order, or what strategies it's going to use. So all of that falls within what we call the cognitive profiles. But now this becomes even more interesting, because you would say, okay, well, psychologists are doing their thing, but what do they know about the brain, right? But when we look at it from the neuroscientific perspective, so we look at the studies that are doing different types of scanners in the brain, what we see is that those profiles that psychologists are claiming, that there are different ways in which people actually perceive and process information, those might actually be simplifications of the reality, because the reality is even more complex than that. And what I really like is that there are some studies, and I'll do another video just to talk about them, but in these studies, neuroscientists claim that human beings almost have like a neural fingerprint. And what that means is that the way your brain reacts to one specific stimulus, so for example, like an image or a sound, the way your brain reacts to that is going to be completely different from how another person reacts to that, the brain, and another person, which basically means that the way each brain it's actually processing this information, it's so unique that it's almost like you can link the brain to the person, right? Because every person is going to have like a fingerprint, like a different way in which the brain is going to light up different pathways and different sections, different parts of it for each of these types of information that it is exposed to. But it's all going to depend on just how it's wired, basically. And this is super interesting, actually, because for the longest time in second language acquisition, we've been talking about individual differences. And it's always been believed that, every student has like a different way to perceive the reality and to learn, and that strategies are very specific. And we do know from research as well that very good language learners are those that are going to develop specific strategies adapted to how they learn best, but also to compensate for their weaknesses, because they are aware of their weaknesses, so they can kind of put in place certain strategies that will allow them to, like, let's say, mitigate the risk of those weaknesses actually showing when they're learning a language or when they're communicating. And we do know that from research, and we've got lots of examples and case studies in which we've seen that. But until we had all of these images of the brains and how they light up differently depending on the person, it kind of remained as a theory. It wasn't really like grounded in what I would like to call like real science. Like for me, if I don't see it lighting up in the brain, then I'm still like, okay, we'll see. But in this case, we do have very, very strong evidence that this is actually happening. And this gives us a very strong basis to support those research studies where we say, yes, actually people learn in different ways. And although we can have these profiles that psychologists talk about, the cognitive profiles, eventually we are all within a spectrum, and there are quite a lot of different factors that are going to influence how your brain actually lights up in reaction to every task or to every stimulus that you get. So remember, your brain, it's like the control tower of everything else, especially of your learning and of your communication. So if your brain has a unique way of doing things, then understanding that unique way and understanding the strengths and the weaknesses, it's going to underlie everything else that you do, because every single other point you're going to do it with your brain. So now we're going to look at how each of those points are actually being heavily influenced by you understanding how your brain works, and why this is actually the most determinant element in you succeeding at language learning. And this is a topic that I've been so passionate about. I've spent literally the past few years thinking about this and thinking if there was a way I could develop a tool that would allow me, without necessarily having to scan your brain, because to be honest, that wouldn't be too practical, but something that would allow me to understand how your brain learns languages in at least some detail, that would allow me to give you more effective strategies than if I don't know how your brain learns. Because honestly, even if this is a super important part of how we learn languages and it can have a huge impact, there hasn't been so much research on it. There has been some research trying to identify the characteristics of students that are like really good language learners and trying to separate those from the other students that are not very good language learners, and looking at the different cognitive profiles of them. But to be honest, that's not very helpful, because if you have a profile that is not necessarily optimized for language learning, but you still really want to do it, my goal is to help you find the strategies that are going to allow you to do it. So I just don't like this kind of view that we are predestined to do something or not to do it, and that because our profile doesn't align, we shouldn't even try because we're not going to be good enough. So I have been researching this a lot for the past few years, and then eventually I developed a tool that I have been refining with my private one-on-one clients, like my corporate clients. And now, after quite a few months of kind of thinking how I could do it, I have finally decided to make it available to the public so that you too can find out how your brain learns languages, and you can start leveraging these kind of insights that have been so helpful for my private clients. Now, if you are interested and you would like to take this test and get your personalized report with all the insights and strategies that you should use if you want to optimize how your brain learns languages and how it could learn them even better, then I don't know when you're watching this, but there should be a link in the description that it's either going to take you to join the waiting list so you get notified when it goes live, or you may already have access to the live event or to the tool once it's available. So I let you check the details if you're interested. Now, let's go back now to our main question, and let me explain why understanding how your brain learns, it's actually key for any of the other elements to make sense and to be as effective as they can be. Now, for the first of our statements, we said finding the perfect method or app for you. This means that if the method is adapted to how you learn, it's because it's based on how your brain learns languages. So while you might want to try to find a good method or a method that is adapted to you or an app, my view is that with all the thousands and thousands of methods and apps that there are out there, if you want to try every single one of them to try to figure out which one is going to work best for you, you may actually just waste years before you find the one. So instead, what you can do is to understand how your brain learns. And once you understand how your brain learns, you will be much better positioned to first choose the right apps and the right methods. And within those methods, you're probably going to want to pick the little bits that are the best adapted to how your brain learns and that are the most useful, and probably ignore the rest of it. So you're not going to need to take any specific method. You're just going to have to build your own method based on your brain's preferences and struggles, so that, as I was saying, you can compensate and you can make sure that whatever your brain's weaknesses are for learning languages, it's not stopping you from getting the results you want. Because honestly, if you're using the right strategies, there's no reason why you should not be able to progress. It may take more effort, it may take more time, but you will get there. Now, the third point that we had, and that it's also very important, but not many students actually noted it, and I was a bit disappointed about it. And I said, I do know why it is, and I'm going to explain why now. But it's how important it is to be working with the right teacher. And let's start from the beginning. Why is understanding your brain so important? Because once you understand how your brain learns, you can do two things. The first one is you can try to find a teacher that actually adapts to that way of learning. And not every teacher is going to be happy to adapt. A lot of teachers will say, I've got my method, this is how I teach. And if you don't like it, well, find someone else. So in that case, knowing how your brain learns, knowing your preferences and your weaknesses is going to be amazing, because you're just going to go try to find a teacher. And this is the second point. You find a teacher and you can tell them clearly, I need to learn like this, I need to do this, I need to do that. Are you going to be able to help? And then if the teacher is honest, which I think most teachers are quite honest, they will tell you like, look, that's going to work. I can try, or not, like I don't feel comfortable with that way of learning because it's so different from how I have learned languages and how I have been taught that I wouldn't even know where to start. And that happens a lot actually, because we know from research that teachers tend to teach in whichever way they found it most effective for them to learn that thing. So it's a bit tricky, because then it means that teachers are eventually going to be trying to teach students in the way they learned, not necessarily in the way the students need to learn. So that's why it's so important that you are aware of how your brain learns, and then you can go and try to find a good teacher. And then I said, why is it so interesting that most students didn't think this was an important factor? And I think it's coming a bit from that fact that because teachers have such personal ways of teaching, I've heard a lot of students complaining of how difficult it is to find a teacher that adapts to how you learn, and they've been so disappointed that eventually they don't really see the teacher as the person guiding the learning. They see the teacher as someone that is going to help, but not necessarily going to manage and coordinate the entire process. So that's very interesting. And as I said, as a teacher, I'm actually a bit upset about this. Not upset against the students, of course, but kind of upset for that we've come to this point, because I still think teaching is an extremely difficult and challenging job. And it's just kind of a shame that somehow all of these theories have failed us in allowing us to help the students in the best possible way, so that students actually see how useful it can be to work with a teacher, with an expert that can guide you on that very difficult journey that it's learning a foreign language. Now, moving to the fourth element that I had given you, consistency and discipline. And this was the clear winner among the members in my WhatsApp channel, because they all thought this is the most important one. And even some of them put comments and said, all of the others are important, but if you don't have consistency and discipline, you're not going to get anywhere, because eventually we know results is consistency plus time, right? Like consistency throughout a long period of time normally gets you results. Now, my problem with this, and I've seen it actually a lot, unfortunately, it's that if you are very consistent doing the wrong things, you're not going to get the results you want. And the problem is that some students are doing a lot, but it's a bit like random things they're doing, because they don't have a direction and they don't understand how their brain learns. So they are doing a lot, putting a lot of hours, a lot of effort for many, many years. And some of the students I've been working with just recently in my Language Results Accelerator program have been trying to learn a language for like 20 plus years, and they're still not seeing results. And believe me, they have been so consistent and so disciplined and always doing their exercises and doing whatever it is that they've been told they should do. The problem is that the methods they were given, the strategies they were given, the resources they were given, they were not adapted to how the brain learns, and they didn't understand their brain. So that really meant that they were wasting their time. They put in a lot of effort into doing something that, yes, it's moving, it's still doing something, and of course there's some learning, but it's definitely not the most efficient way for them to go from A, which is where they are now, to B, which is where they want to be, which is being fluent in the language. So this is why research shows that while having discipline and consistency is super important, actually understanding your brain is more important. And within that part of your brain, I'm going to include as well your emotions, and that's motivation as a part of it. How motivated you are, it's going to determine eventually how consistent you are with your learning. If you are very motivated, you're going to find time to practice no matter what. And again, I've seen plenty of examples. I mean, I've got that at home where my dad will go on holidays and he'll still need to do his English practice every day, no matter what, because it's the motivation, it's the drive that is there. So that's why, I mean, this is super important, but that's why if you don't understand how your brain works, doesn't matter how consistent you are, you may not get to the results you want. And either way, if you first understand how your brain works and then you become really consistent, then you are going to get results much faster. And then the last point, it's about having very clear goals and a roadmap. And I quite like this one because, you know, if you've ever watched my videos or if you've been in some of my courses or you have been in some of my paid programs, it's quite interesting that I'm always talking about goals and about roadmap. And I feel there is a certain number of students that actually pick that option thinking Esther is all about systems. Esther is all about having goals and roadmaps and very clear milestones of, you know, like a very clear road of where we're going. So I think that's probably why they selected this option. I do still think that goals and a roadmap are extremely helpful and are instrumental. They're key, because if you want to go somewhere, you need to have a destination, right? I always say if you leave the house in the car and you want to get to point B, you need to put point B in your GPS. Otherwise, like, unless you know the way by heart, which might be the case, but if you don't, then you're just going to be like driving around without a set direction or even knowing like where you're going. So yes, they are very important, but I've got the same problem. If you've got very clear goals and you have a very clear roadmap, but it's not the right roadmap because it's not been built on the things that you actually need to do for your brain to optimize every hour and every minute of learning, then I mean, it's not that it's not going to help, but it's kind of like the fact that you haven't understood your brain first. It's kind of hindering the impact of this element and the potential positive impact that this can have, because you have to see this a bit of as a flywheel. Once you know how your brain works, now you understand your emotions, you understand what strategies work for your brain, you have very clear goals, you have a very clear roadmap. Now, because you know how your brain works, you can also find the best method or the best set of strategies that are going to work for you. And that means you can also find the right resources, the right apps, of course, the right teacher if you need a teacher to help you in this process. And then you add the consistency and the discipline, then you are going to get good results very fast. And I always say it's just a matter of aligning all of these things. Once you put them all together and you start all pushing in the same direction, seeing results and seeing progress, it's almost inevitable. You are just going to get there. So I hope with this video, at least now, you know the importance of understanding your own brain. And if you don't want to take the test, what you can do is start thinking about how you learn, how you like learning. Think about all your previous learning experiences you've had in your life. Think about learning how to drive, learning how to play sport, how to play an instrument. Reflect on those experiences and try to think, okay, what aspects did I really enjoy? How did I actually learn? What was the process like? And sometimes this is difficult because we may not remember the process, but it's very important that you do think about the process and then try to identify patterns that you see repeat themselves. And then that's already giving you clues of how your brain functions and the kind of things that you should be trying to do for your language learning. And the opposite is true as well. So anything that you usually struggle with, so you say, look, I always struggle with details. I'm very bad at details, and like, you know, I don't have a very good eye for details. Then that's something that you are probably also doing when you're learning a language. And that's probably why you're still getting conjugations wrong and declinations wrong and the plurals wrong and some of the pronunciation wrong, because your brain is not actually seeing all of those details. So you need to retrain your brain to be able to see those details now because those are important for language learning. Now, I hope this was useful and it helped clarify this question of the importance of the elements. Of course, there are many, many more elements that play a role, like some people mentioned in the comments, the importance of connecting with the people from the country and the whole emotional side. And of course, that's hugely important. There's all the emotions that we have barely touched upon in here. Of course, they're in your brain, but your emotions are also going to be hugely important in how you learn. So again, it's a very, very complex picture, and my next video is going to touch a little bit on that and the complexity of learning a language and why it's not so simple to find your right method. But until then, if you are curious, I recommend that you check this other video next, because it's already going to give you a few clues on how the brain works in general, certain principles that apply to mostly everyone, and it will definitely help you understand a bit better how you should be thinking about the language learning process.